creature.
I love Destiny 2. It's a game that I've spent literally thousands of hours playing. I've made both virtual and real life friends playing it. In a way, it almost transcends a game for me in that I find it hard to compare my experience to any other game because I've had such an intimate journey with it. The game is just simply phenomenal. Its core FPS experience is possibly the best on the market. Responsive firing mechanics, incredible gun feel, a plethora of varied weapons to use in your arsenal, all combining together into a borderline religious experience for FPS fans. Underlying the incredible core gameplay experience is a world that is so intriguing and unique that it engaged the hearts and minds of millions of people for over a decade. There is nothing like Destiny 2, and I strongly feel that nothing ever will be. And people have tried, none of them succeeded. So as I said, I love Destiny 2, and I likely always will. It was this adoration that compelled me to log back in on the 7th of February to play the new Sundered Doctrine dungeon activity with a couple of members of my old fire team. The tragedy of it all, I loved playing Destiny 2 with my friends, but if you left the game recently like I did, Sundered Doctrine and episode Heresy are highly unlikely to bring you back. Logging back in from what felt like an incredibly long hiatus was like riding a bike. Everything was where I remembered. My character was the same, my guns were the same, my loadout and builds were the same. It was all the same, which on the one hand felt like the warm embrace of an old friend, and on another, reconnecting with a problematic ex I still had feelings for. I was still in love, but accompanied by a sudden and cold reminder of why I stopped playing in the first place. Nothing had really changed. When I joined my friends in party chat, we had a great time reconnecting. It was all smiles and jokes, many of them at the expense of either the game or each other. After briefly bonding over how out of touch with the game we were, we fired up the Sundered Doctrine dungeon with no knowledge of the mechanics or the setting. The dungeon is set in the vast ship of a long dead raid boss with the solidified corpse of a dead god hanging in the background. If there's one thing that Bungie always gets right, it's the art direction. Every sprawling vista a sight to behold, and often gives me pause when I'm exploring new areas of the game. After a few misadventures, we found ourselves in an open room. My friends and I explored at length for the next pathway for us to progress towards the first encounter. Frustratingly, it wasn't obvious where we were supposed to go. As it turns out, it was behind a waterfall. Who knew? An obvious cliche that in the setting of Destiny 2 seemed staggeringly less obvious. This little navigational puzzle was the first of a few within the dungeon. This one generated laughs, others exhaustion. Entering the first encounter, the mechanic was immediately fairly obvious. There were mirrors and light. So align the mirrors with the light. And this in a nutshell was correct. I actually found this quite endearing. It appealed to my memories of Zelda dungeons or reminiscent of a Tomb Raider temple. The mechanic worked well, and best of all, it wasn't buggy. The enemy density was appropriate for the encounter, providing a level of complexity to a fairly straightforward puzzle. It felt well balanced. I enjoyed it. It was also a mechanic that myself and my friends could figure out without guides, and that was satisfying. I maintain that the best content still left in Destiny 2 is its most scarce. The first run of a new dungeon or a new raid, working out the mechanics and puzzles for yourself, and overcoming that challenge with friends. An activity you only get one chance to ever experience. Once you understand the process, the secret is out and you'll never get it back. At the end of that encounter, we were blessed with some new loot. I got a scout rifle, which gave me a chance to inspect the new models. Thematically, they looked excellent. A blend between the loot from Vow of the Disciple and an almost like skeletal rigidness familiar to the Hive. I played around with the weapon as we moved through the next section of the dungeon, but quickly switched back at the first sign of a challenge. Nearing the next encounter, we stumbled on what is still my favorite event in the whole dungeon. This weird Indiana Jones styled tumbling spiky ball puzzle. Consistent with my earlier feeling, it further immersed me into that whole Zelda dungeon vibe. It worked surprisingly well despite the somber setting we found ourselves within. I was unable to experience the conclusion to this for myself because my ego got me killed and I spawned at the hidden exit, completely unbeknownst to me that it was even there in the first place. With a brief introduction to the next mechanic, some Wheel of Fortune style light puzzle, we were ready to tackle the next stage. Taking a small break to admire the local bird life that was definitely intentional, we pressed on into the second encounter. Now, how do I discuss this? This encounter was definitely a turning point in our journey in a bad way. Up to now, we'd been having a really good time, each new challenge accompanied by laughter and a healthy amount of what Destiny 2 does best, shooting aliens in the face. Let's start with the good. These 4 Shrieker bosses, I really like the new sleek design that aligns with the darkness aesthetic that we've seen since we first entered a darkness ship in Shadowkeep. They just look really cool. I appreciate seeing a new design for a decade-old enemy. They felt fresh and interesting in what could have been an exercise in disappointment with just a bunch of normal Shriekers. But that's where the positivity really ended for this one. The mechanics were just so obtusely convoluted that I hesitate to even mention any detail of them. It was akin to some kind of weird game show where these wheels had symbols on them that dictate a particular outcome. When a Shrieker casts their gaze on them, it locks the symbol in, and then that outcome is kind of brought to life. These include things like greater numbers of strong enemies entering the room, which quickly becomes unruly. Getting the correct symbol to activate starts a damage phase that's really just as simple as shooting the Shriekers in the eyes. But dear God, did they have a lot of health. The damage phases are really, really long, designed for drawn out DPS phases with weapons suited to greater overall damage than quick bursts, which would work perfectly if heavy ammo would ever drop. I spent the majority of this encounter with little, if any, heavy ammo to do damage. And yes, I know you can optimize your loadout to mitigate this. We had the armor mods on, and we didn't have a warlock with Cenotaph, but I'd make a fairly reasonable argument that for any normal run of this dungeon, a specific class with a specific exotic helmet really shouldn't be necessary. The length of the damage phases made this encounter an enormous slog to get through. Once it had ended, much of that enthusiasm that I felt in the beginning had been unceremoniously drained from me and my friends. The fall from the heights that the first encounter set as a standard really made this feel even more of a letdown. It just wasn't for me, and I'm positive I'm not alone in feeling that way. This was also topped off by a particularly poorly rolled pair of gauntlets that I immediately infused, which just felt bad. Like, it just felt really bad. This has long been an issue with the armor loot system in Destiny 2, and sadly, it appears it is still present in endgame activities like this. This was then accompanied by a new door opening mechanic that you had to roll an eye from the recently dead bosses into a depression in the ground that was of a similar shape. My compatriots were really not a fan of this, but I thought it was a cute little homage to past dungeon crawlers. I think this encounter had worn thin any goodwill that my fire team had stored up to this point. Leaving the encounter, we progressed once more through the gorgeous setting of the dungeon, my team even making jokes at my expense for verbally gushing over the environments. We then entered an open room littered with rotatable mirrors that would lead us to the final boss. I really liked this puzzle room. If it wasn't directly inspired by Tomb Raider, I'd be really shocked. It was a clever little mind bender whose answer wasn't immediately obvious. I thought its difficulty was in line with expectation for an activity like this, but oh my God, the enemies did not need to keep spawning here, not presenting any kind of challenge, just a light annoyance while you jump around the room. Just let them die and not respawn. It's a small thing, but I do feel it's a worthy criticism. That aside, we completed the puzzle and we pushed on into the final encounter. Now, when the boss revealed itself, I felt very little by its somewhat unique appearance. In fact, my first thought was, look at that big scion. Perhaps my excitement had worn down at this point, but I feel that many returning players would have a similar reaction. Here's this new boss that looks exactly like an enemy you've killed 1,000 times before on the EDZ, but their name is Gortash the Destroyer, lover of your mother, Cal of Bird Eggs, second courtesan of the House of Oryx, ascendant. It was deflating, to say the least. To be clear, I also wasn't expecting Xivu Arath to appear here or some new godlike enemy for us to face. Just something, I don't know, a little bit more intimidating perhaps. The mechanics are again quite heavy, in keeping with the tone of this dungeon. When I first wrote this section, I was actually really scathing of it, but upon reflection, my angst after having recently beat the dungeon may have overshadowed my first impressions. I think they were fine in the context of this activity. The boss's health was much more in line with expectations this time. With an unoptimized fire team, it took us 5 phases, which would have been 4 if not for ammo scarcity, which again made each of us grit our teeth in frustration, drawing out the encounter and largely overstaying its welcome. It wasn't only the ammo though, the mechanics were a bit finicky, taking a reasonably long time to complete in the lead up to a damage phase, again overshadowing what could have been a more positive impression of the fight. Another very small thing, so please bear with me, there's this door that you have to damage in order to open. I don't get this. It wasn't fun, it didn't add any value to the encounter, it was honestly just really annoying and further impacted the really sparse ammo economy. Bungie, please just don't do this one again. I still, even a few days later, writing this review, can't understand what this was for. It could have just been a door. To solve the puzzle to start a damage phase, you need to solve a riddle on the central platform, which is mostly covered by finding this bat creature and observing the symbol that it drops. If you're a lore buff, apparently you can circumvent this mechanic and simply identify the truth from the lie, presented by the symbols that appear and activate them accordingly. I kind of like that. It gives those invested in such things a slight advantage. I think that's really cool. Rewarding knowledge of the game directly within an activity while not making it essential to completing it. All in all, we killed the Cal of bird eggs and received our loot. In the aftermath, I asked my friends for their impressions, and despite their frustration at the mechanics, they both reflected positively on the experience. Sundered Doctrine is a good piece of content, but a little bit of an ugly duckling, held back by its awkward implementation of mechanic-heavy encounters. I had fun, but honestly, it was mostly down to good company rather than a flawless experience. At this point in the video, I want to give my initial impressions of episode Heresy as well, knowing full well that there's a roadmap of content to come and plenty of new experiences to come with it. So this is just my initial impressions. The opening mission introduces us to the relic of the Dreadnought, where the majority of the episode's activities take place. The opening shot of it, just hanging lifelessly in a tangle of cosmic tentacles, was breathtaking. As usual, the set pieces are stunning in this game. At the conclusion of the opening mission, we're given a fairly compelling plot point to draw enduring fans back. So spoilers, but this happens.
Vile creature.
I must admit that in the moment, I was stunned and very impressed by Bungie's boldness in eliminating a mainstay of the franchise, to only then have that somewhat shattered by another cutscene at the end of the mission where Eris is once again alive, presumably in an ascendant realm of her own. I'm glad that Bungie are reaching high with the narrative and pulling on the heartstrings of existing fans. It's those interpersonal stories that strike at the heart of our feeling of comfort that really draws us in, especially in the nostalgic halls of the Dreadnought. I'm also very pleased to say that I had a positive impression of episode Heresy's new activity, the Nether. But let's talk about the activities within the Nether first. It's basically just busy work, in complete honesty. Like, you kill this thing, activate these objects, dunk this ball in this bucket, etc., etc. It's all stuff we've seen before. The busy work was not really very fun. It gave me the eye-rolling feeling of, I've been here, I've done this, I don't want to do it again, and I don't much care about the loot incentive because Bungie announced that there's no Comet DLCs coming anymore, so there's nothing really for me to prepare for. The Dread feature very heavily here as enemies, and they present their own challenges, including the boss that appears at the end of the activity once you've done 3 objectives. I could nitpick, but overall, there's nothing inherently wrong with the busy work. It's just that busy work. And I don't play video games to do busy work, at least not without a very compelling reason. But all the busy work felt more fun than usual because the setting, the roguelite elements of the activity, and the hidden secrets within the Dreadnought belayed that apathy. The Nether has 2 primary mechanics. Firstly, health does not automatically recover with time. There are multiple ways to recover health, but it's now a resource, not a given. So it makes you feel more considerate when you're engaging in combat. I really like that. Second, when completing an activity on the Dreadnought, you're granted one of many random boons. Some will synergize with your build, others will provide direct increases to stats or even a new ability. They're varied and interesting, and I'm certain that this will work effectively, especially when new difficulties are added to the Nether. The activity also has limited revives, meaning that you can grind for an extended period of time, getting stronger as you go, and receiving more loot with higher rarity the further you progress, and the higher the difficulty and pressure becomes. It's a great system, and one I believe has elevated the enjoyment of the mundanity of grindy seasonal activities. So bravo, Bungie. But again, the tragedy is I don't want to jump in and grind again. I'm not even particularly motivated to log in next week or even for the next act. It isn't anything that's inherently wrong with episode Heresy itself or Sundered Doctrine. The repetitive state of new content rollouts in the game has simply taken its toll. Destiny 2 is a brilliant game whose core is made of solid gold. I don't believe anything ridiculous like the old meme of Destiny 2 being a dead game or whatever, because it isn't, and it won't be until Bungie themselves call it or the studio is shut down. But it feels like such a shame that something this good is just being wrapped in a new color of tinsel every few months. It needs its core taken out and the wrapping refreshed. A new start for a brilliant franchise, whether that's Destiny 3 or something else entirely. The point of this video was definitely not to bash Bungie over what they've created. I actually thought the content was well put together and I had a great time with my friends playing it. Bungie are doing what they can with what they have, and I appreciate that they're enduring through adversity to keep the world we love alive. Sundered Doctrine was a great piece of content and I'm sure many people will love playing it. What I played of episode Heresy was also really positive, and I commend Bungie for pushing the roguelite envelope. It's one of my favorite genres. The point of this video was actually to answer a very simple question. Do I recommend jumping back into Destiny 2 right now? The answer is, if you left for the same reasons that I did, then no, I unfortunately don't. You'll only find disappointment. If you're still actively loving the game, then get your friends in, take them through the raids. There's an abundance of incredible content for new players. Hell, bring your enemies too, take them on a trials card. I guarantee you that they will never speak to you again. This video started as a review of new Destiny 2 content, but it evolved into some kind of lamenting love letter to the game. I said it at the beginning and I'll say it again now. I love Destiny 2, an old friend that I desperately want to find a way to reconnect with.